AU this year. And we just had a really, really good conversation at AU. And later, as we connected, I found out Noel not only is a professor, is a researcher, but also an entrepreneur. And he invests very deeply in teaching. So a lot of the perspectives of how design can be taught, I think especially in today's age, where AI is changing a lot of how education could be done, is very refreshing. That's why I invited Noah to join us and share his perspectives. And we're looking forward to have more discussion around after the talk. All yours, Noah.
All right, thanks. Yeah, it was really awesome to meet you and lots of people like Keem Wamsley and few others at AU 24, and that was my second AU. I was at AU 23 as well, and I'll talk a little bit about the project that I talked about at AU 23 and 24 a little bit later on. But the development of that project is as a result of disability as well. So, but it's a little bit different from the first things I'm going to talk about. So, um. Back at NYU, I teach design and innovation to our students, and I teach a lot of the stuff that I teach is through the focus of looking at disability as a driver for innovation. So I'm going to talk about some of the projects I've worked on. Almost they'll be more like stories, and I hope it's a little bit more informal rather than just a presentation, right? That if people want to ask questions at any point, feel free to do so or save them till the end, and I'll be happy to answer anything. Some of this stuff will go into um, more personal side of things, how, my own condition affects my life and how I use that to drive innovation as well. So I get on with it because I could talk about all sorts of stuff all day long. So my thoughts on our design for disability is actually designing for yourself, for your um and when we look at that, one of the things I suppose I'd like to start with is something that we're all looking at these days is this idea of AI and design. And I'll start talking about this all because it's something I'm increasingly incorporating into my own work and teaching my students. And I think there's a unique value that goes beyond what we might first realize when using AI in design. I think myself using AI in design to bookend the part of the process that requires the most human intervention, right? So if we think about at the beginning and at the end of the design process, those parts we can do a lot of AI in, but then human part of what we need to do when we create designs, that part requires expanding the possibility to do more of that human intervention, to be able to expand the opportunity to be more human, to, I suppose, engage with our world and with each other in the pursuit of true understanding. And I think that's what is really AI's strongest appeal to me, to allow us and our students to do more of that kind of work. Um, and to have more time to get into the emotional reasoning for the design work we do as much as the other aspects of that work, and to create better products, services, and experiences as a result of having more time to understand and empathize. And this increased empathic bandwidth will create emotional connection to new products, services, and experiences. And building these connections reveals opportunities for companies and organizations to create customers for life, making our lives better for longer, increasing the time we have. We have our own independence regardless of the ability that we have. So I've also been working on a kind of framework to show the connection between disability and every human. And when we design for the extremes, it's usually two ends of the scale, but ultimately we all end up in the same place at the top of this pyramid. It's the why of the design for extremes that sort of intrigues me, the idea of inspire versus aspire, compromise capabilities versus extreme capability. This sort of diagram that I've created tries to explain that a little bit. When we look at design for extremes in the center here, and we look at, if we go to the left, we're looking at compromised capabilities or disabilities, and we go to the right, we're looking at extreme capabilities or superhumans. Let's look at sports stars, for example, and people who are able to do extraordinary things. And on the left-hand side, compromised capabilities or disabilities are special and unique. we're inspired to design to meet the demands of who inspires us. And often it's people who live their lives against the odds, right? But then on the other side, it's our idols and icons. We design for the demands of our aspirations, what we want to be, how we see ourselves. And I keep thinking about how actually these two extremes have a lot more in later on in life because they both end up at the same pinnacle, right? We end up, a lot of people with who practice extreme capabilities or superhumans or sports stars often end up with debilitating injuries, and that leads to disability later on in life. So we all end up in this situation. Um, and I think it's very important for us to sort of think about how which side of this diagram is as more important. I don't think either of them is more important, but one of them is something that affects us more than the other. And often we don't realize that by thinking about disability as something that is of other people. We don't realize that is going to happen to all of us. So what I'm thinking about with this diagram is trying to establish, right, how should we think about these things? How do we change our the way we go about this work and change the narrative as a result of that? Because disability is an unavoidable and natural part of the human condition. None of us ever live our lives in an optimal condition our entire lives. We might have injuries, we might have to care for others. If you're pregnant, when you get older, all of these situations have us in these sort of suboptimal condition in the bodies that we exist in. So we probably forget about the difficulties of those scenarios as we move through our lives and we dip in and out of disability to some degree. So I think it's important for us to sort of take a step back and go, "Oh, okay, well, if I was to look at all of my life, how much of it did I spend optimally in my body?" And I think we'd be quite surprised to find that we're not always as optimal as we might believe we are. And learning about disability could help us to sort of go, okay, how can we address all of that as well as help people with disabilities? And people with disabilities actually have secret and mystical powers. We have this unique opportunity in learning about our own futures by tapping into these powers. People with disabilities will often plan into the future. They to some degree can see the future because even in my own situation, I will often try to plan well ahead of any circumstances that might occur and several different eventualities of what might occur as a result of that. So you're always living in the future. You're always thinking about what's going to happen to a degree that no one else probably has to do just because you can't afford for circumstances to occur that cause you any issues. And it's more profound with people with disabilities because the world is just not built for many of them to be able to manage it. So being able to plan and live in the future to some degree allows people with disabilities to manage in the world that we live in. So that means that they develop this sort of muscle memory for project planning, project management, and risk analysis. This is a lady, her name is Li Hongzhu. She's a doctor in China. And she has spent over the last 15 years, over 6,000 call outs to village patients. And she has no legs, right? She went back to college, studied, became a doctor, and went back to her village and local villages and continues to do all this work. And the amount of effort that she would have to go into project planning, management, risk analysis, and the mental agility to understand how she's going to get to these places and do the work that she has to do must be incredible. So I think that there's another part of the disability that we don't realize is highly valuable is the capability, not the disability that they have, that people like that have disability to plan ahead and do the work that they do manage to get to do. And it's also the case that over 15% of the planet's population is living with some form of disability. It's the biggest minority group in the world, and we all end up joining it. It doesn't discriminate against race, gender, sexuality, or color, and it eventually becomes our lived experience and how we exist in the world. And this number is only increasing, by the way. It's estimated that by 2100, almost 27% of the planet's population will be in this category. And it might sound like a little bit, difficult news to hear, but it's actually a positive thing. It means that more of us are living longer, as the biggest part of this minority group is actually the elderly. Being lucky enough to live long enough, we will all become disabled. And it's not a bad thing. Like I said, it's part of the human condition. And it's why inclusion today and how we design our approach to design is critically important. Designing with disability rather than for disability will help all of us. But where do we begin? And I believe that we need to embrace that idea I mentioned earlier, that disability is a natural and unavoidable part of the human condition. By leaning into this, we begin to address not only issues around disability today, but for every human that will ever exist, including ourselves. And it makes business sense too. Imagine gaining customers for life because people start using products that were so easy to use to almost feel like second nature, and to seamlessly move from one form of the self to another, and those products and experience are still being still usable, almost like second nature. But where do we begin to understand? By creating intentional discomfort, and it's something I teach my students. It's referred to as discursive design as well. And there's a picture here about creating this intentional discomfort that I'm going to talk a little bit more about later on. So a lot of this work will begin with us achieving empathy for problems by experiencing them firsthand ourselves. Simple devices to help us achieve answers are always remarkably close to us. With a little imagination, we can learn a lot. So, for example, I have a picture of a pencil here, right? So if we take a pen or a pencil or anything like that, and we put it between our fingers like this, we actually negate the use of a few of our fingers, and we've created a small disability for ourselves, right? So these things around us, if we do these things with them, can teach us small sparks of discomfort that might help us to think differently about how we design. Um, Another approach is to enable those with knowledge and lived experience to be able to deliver ideas by teaching them tools and software like Autodesk software to design solutions that benefit us all. And part of the work I'm doing on the bike project is about that, helping people who build bikes to be able to redesign parts for themselves based on their individual requirements, and upgrading those things to help everyone in the community. So I'm going to tell you some stories and show you some work I've done to create empathy devices and tools and how they have affected things. This video is one of those, so I'll let it play. So what I've been doing here is trying to create a means to understand what the built environment is like from the perspective of a wheelchair user, but also try to understand what the wheelchair is going through as it moves through the built environment. And then the sort of dichotomy between the parts of the built environment, such as sidewalks and the areas between the commercial entities that we move to, and what they're like for the wheelchair. So you can see there's a lot of vibration and impact. There's a lot of shaking of the camera and things like that. But then when we transfer to the supermarket, for example, we end up with this gliding motion of the wheelchair. It's able to move around with no problems. We're able to manage in this environment much more effectively than we would if we were out and about on the sidewalks between those built environments, right? So the idea behind this is to sort of raise this question of why is there such a remarkable difference between one and the other when we actually are in charge of building both of these environments, right? Another project I worked on was attempting to sort of show the difference in what an able-bodied person might see versus what a wheelchair user sees while moving around in our built environment. So in this case, what I used was two cameras attached to a bike helmet. I looked like a crazy person, by the way, going around with this thing on. And I was able to create a means to show both views at the same time. So when you're looking at this video, one of them is the view you would have if you were walking, and the other one is the view that you take when you're in a wheelchair. You're looking at the ground constantly, trying to figure out where the next obstacle is, to try and avoid it before you get to it, to be able to negotiate when you do get to it. And it's a weird thing because people will often, look at a person maybe in a wheelchair and sort of go like, why is that person staring at the ground? Or, what they may not look the happiest because they're concentrating so much on the thing that they're trying to manage, right? And this video is sort of you know, the cognitive effort of doing that extra work of trying to understand the environment in relation to your own disability is quite high. It can be not only tiring from the vibration and impact of the chair, but also from the work of trying to figure out how to manage in the built environment.
You're having to observe several things, not just the footpath, but the cars that are approaching at a pedestrian crossing. So that means like
That's my dog, by the way. There's
stop, but you're also
trying to full walk.
sort of scan the ground in front of you to make sure that you can get across. And there's a couple of like observances in relation to that I sort of noticed was that when there's cars there, you sort of have a tendency to rush across to get to the other side, not so you don't inconvenience them.
So we can see with that how this thing can how disabilities can affect these kinds of things. But these ideas that I just showed you were actually born of a previous project. Again, using a phone and a cheap action camera, I could create a means to describe issues and gather data about our built environment. So what I've done here is I just literally attached my phone to my chair, use accelerometer data to monitor the condition of the built environment and overlaid that with an action camera. So I could see where the impacts occurred and record that data. And as a result of that, we were able to create these digital maps, these digital breadcrumbs of the impacts and problems, right? So all the black points on this, we were able to go, right, that's a point of impact where the wheelchair got a severe hit. And then we were able to use this information and data and look at Google Street View and previous video where we were able to go, right, that condition, that thing has been there for quite a long time. This is the G-forces involved in the impact of going over it. So hundreds and thousands of people maybe have passed over that, maybe have tripped and fell, maybe have had a stroller, whatever. Different things could have happened here that we don't realize all of these impacts and them happening. So we create these digital breadcrumbs and these maps, and we give them to our local authorities, and they were able to use this information then to repair the sidewalks. And it's often the case that no one will really know what it took to achieve that, right? So very much like a lot of the work we do as innovators, and most of it is unseen. The overall result of what we do, if it's done well, shouldn't even be noticed. So when you do this work of gathering this data and you put it in, you use that data to fix a problem or create a solution, no one sees that part of it. And often that thing that you produced doesn't even get noticed, which feels like a lot of thankless work, right? But it's almost always the work of a designer to try and achieve that, right? So the best results we can achieve are when we help others to do the things they want by taking away extra effort and difficulty and give back time. And we were able to do a lot of that. So and the effect of something like this has further reaches than we can imagine. For me, it's easier to get in and out of town. For a parent with a stroller, a child is no longer being shaken around. For an older person with a visual impairment, it's easier to and safer to navigate. Our work, even when it's not noticed, can have further reaching consequences, and they can affect the physical and mental well-being of people also. And I also think about, it's not just data and information that's useful for doing this work. It's also, we think about the future of ground delivery robots. Imagine them being able to use the information that a wheelchair user gathered to know where they can go. It's almost the exact same thing. So being able to sort of tap into this set of information that a wheelchair user can produce, we can enable other products and services to exist and manage in the built environment. A more recent project I worked on is directly related to subject matter that's a little bit closer to me. My master's thesis in IMA at NYU was focused on creating a means for experiencing something that is very hard to describe, and to create more purposeful discomfort. Don't worry, I know I'm talking a lot about discomfort and purposeful discomfort, but we do have a very happy story later on, so it might be a little bit difficult to stomach some of this stuff, but I promise you there's some fun stuff later on as well. So what is this idea, the distraction of anticipation? It's a means for understanding how anticipation distracts us from the full life experience from the perspective of those with disabilities. It's a physical device that takes control away from a person having the experience over a consequence they cannot predict or will ever know when or if it will occur. And it's designed to recreate the hidden feelings that takes us out of the here and now and puts us in a constant state of concern. So, why did I want to do this? I'm a wheelchair user and I'm paralyzed with no feeling from the chest down. And one of the most difficult things to deal with is actually continence issues as a constant and ever-present part of my disability that comes with many complications that can occur without warning at any time. And it's not often talked about and quite a sensitive subject. And I felt there was a need to make something that could attempt to recreate the hidden emotions and feelings of living with conditions like this that actually affects millions who live with disabilities. A means to experience the distraction of anticipation. For many with people with disability, everyday life is constantly compromised by the anticipation of problems that will occur randomly. And these problems can come from in the form of pain, body function, sensory issues, amongst other issues external to the individual. And this leads to this constant awareness of self at a deeper level that affects the ability to live life to its fullest, to engage completely, to experience total existence. And, interacting with others living with disability and looking at products for people with disabilities, I identified a gap in the clinical and technical reasoning and the emotional reasoning for products and experiences developed to help those with disabilities. I began to look at what were the emotions and feelings I could identify in my own circumstances and how to replicate them through simple experimentation. And I wanted to recreate how this experience feels by way of a wearable device that replicates the randomness of the events that leads to anticipation, the distraction as a result of anticipation, and ultimately its consequences. So this project did not start as what I'm talking about today. I had originally wanted to create an installation actually, and the idea I was thinking about was to create some sort of a obstacle course or experience that was easier to navigate or do if you were in a wheelchair, for example. And the objective of this idea was to essentially disable everyone who is not disabled and to create an alternative experience in which disability was the norm or status quo and not being disabled was actually harder. This image is an example of a very inaccessible installation by Olafur Eliasson at the Tate Modern in London, and it was the influence on my original ideas. But when I reflected on that idea, I started to pick it apart and started to figure out what was it I really wanted people to experience. Was I angry at the world for not being accessible? Did I want to make a small part of the world only for me and others like me? And what would this achieve? And I felt I was thinking too much about the physical world and its effects on those with disability, but I wasn't considering the feelings and emotions of this experience. So I began to look at where I could concentrate to extract in its purest form what it actually feels like 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days of the year, have zero control. Could I recreate the constant state of a lack of control? So at the beginning, I started using combinations of everyday objects and carrying out initial experiential testing with family and friends. Was able to carry out further in-person testing of these ideas with larger groups of people. And this helped me to test assumptions and understanding of the problems I had identified. And could I transfer these feelings and emotions to someone else by way of a device? So I had a lot of inspirations, other people with disabilities, older generations, this demographic we'll fit into someday ourselves. And I felt influenced by other well-intentioned efforts to really understand disability, but sort of misguided, more like trying the hero complex, I suppose, but trying to sort of get deeper than that, right? How do we get into the real feelings of it? And I wanted to take away the control and understanding and put the emotional experience front and center. Forget about being in a wheelchair. What's it like, the emotional part of it? And this research led to the work being carried out on building this physical device. And it takes the form of a wearable device, which the person drapes over their arm in a similar way to how you might carry a jacket or how a waiter holds a towel. And there's a random timer. And the timer is activated, leading to a set of 5 vibrations. Person experiencing this does not know when this will occur. This is the distraction phase. Once the vibration's finished, the countdown timer is activated, and this is a random time that the person experiencing the piece has no control over. They only know the amount of time which is counting down, and this is what the person experiencing the piece has been anticipating. And then when the countdown timer reaches 0, a servo motor is activated. And when this servo motor is activated, the balloon is pierced, and this releases the water from the wearable, and this is the consequence phase. And I think you can understand what I'm trying to get at with this device. What happens, right? You've no control over it, and there's a consequence that comes out of it. There's this purposeful discomfort that comes from this device. So what was the results of this when people tried it? People talked about that the random vibrations always caught them off guard. They were never not aware of this device because it's almost a mild stress position that it's warning. It's hard to focus or refocus when the device vibrated. It kept wanting to touch and feel for security, no way to control it, which meant having to wait for it to stop, concerned at it bursting, right? And all of these things are negatives, right? They're not really good things to experience. But what it did is it put people in a different position in the situation they were in. So when people were trying it, the first thing they were thinking about was, where is the nearest sink or bathroom that I can get to when the timer starts? Where is this? Where is that? How can I negate or get past the thing that I know is going to happen, but I don't know when it's going to happen? And it got people thinking about, why do we have two doors going to that bathroom? Why do we have this in the way of that door? All these sorts of things. So you can see objects like these or devices or experiences like these. If we use them in those contexts, we can change how we think about designing and building built environments as much as changing and designing physical objects that we use. So I think there's room in the work that we do to start creating empathy devices that go deeper and help us to understand more so we can do a better job on the other work that we do. So there was new points of view, and these are the things I sort of learned from it throughout the journey of creating this device. Found myself coming face to face with comments I couldn't have even thought about myself. And that's probably because it's a matter of fact nature of the issues for me. They just exist. It's not something that doesn't happen in my life every day. And it's actually quite hard to sort of come face to face with that all the time and try and develop something as a result of the subject matter. And it's okay to get to the end of your patients and recuperate. What was really interesting was making a device that's nondescript is difficult. Because this had to be something that was there, but not really something that you notice so much, right? That's why it's just a very simple looking device. It's not colorful. It doesn't tell you anything. Um, no one found the experience to be good. And some people have seen the idea develop, mentioned the same emotions this piece tries to evoke from a disability point of view were also applicable to other situations where there was a sense of lack of control and random negative circumstances. So one of the key takeaways was that the idea we can create positive results from negative experiences or discursive design, the ability to dig deeper and find a different point of view was very powerful, because we're always looking for the good news story, right? But if we can dig into what is really hard, really, really difficult, and create the things that emulate those difficulties, then we're actually going to do a better job on those good news stories in the future. And there's other opportunities. We can, we can learn so much through these kinds of devices that helps us to create better solutions. Like I mentioned, I feel like, is there an opportunity where we can build in a layer of what do disabilities look like in this built environment before we build it? What way does this thing affect someone before we make it? All of those things that we can now start to expand the possibility to anticipate through empathy tools. For my own circumstances, I was very fortunate that when people seen this idea, they were like, oh, this race car team reached out and they said, how would we do this thing? Because a lot of our drivers have disabilities and we need to be able to solve this issue around what you exactly described. So how can we do it within the race cars? And I got to work with this group then. I'm very interested in race cars, so it was really cool, right? So it's not all these are positives that came from that journey of trying to pull out that those negative emotional feelings of living with those conditions. Okay, the next part of the journey, building bikes and obliterating barriers, creating joy. Now, I explained earlier on, I'm a wheelchair user. My own disability came about as a result of a mountain biking accident nearly 2 decades ago. If you told me just 4 years ago I would be mountain biking again, I would have said you're crazy. But here we are. And this is the journey of the big project I'm currently working on, the one that I spoke at AU 23 and 24. So the big mission, this Project Mjolnir, and I'm going to talk a little bit about maybe the history of bicycles first. Actually, parts of this are from the talks I did at AU 23 and 24, which might be of interest to you. So if we go back in time a little bit, it's hard to believe that the first bicycle, which was called a Lauf machine, running machine, was invented by a guy called Carl Dreiss in 1817. So the history of the bicycle itself isn't all that long when you consider simplicity of the machine. Um, And the Wright brothers, the fathers of flight, were bicycle mechanics and applied the principles of weight and construction in bicycles to the development of their aircraft. So it's pretty amazing the impact a simple bicycle has had on the world. Something like this that we don't realize, we often don't realize, is the reason why we're able to fly today. And that to me is pretty profound if you think a bit more about it. And we also associate bicycles with our first feelings of speed and lightness, giving this sensation of flying. And there's all sorts of bikes, right? That from BMXs to mountain bikes to racing bikes, there's bikes for every type of personality. And they're also our first personal mode of transport, right? Machines that took us, well, I suppose electric scooters are becoming more that now, but certainly when I was a kid, it was a bicycle. There were machines that took us on journeys further away from home with friends. Our first true freedom and independence, one of our earliest means of escape and adventure. And I began the journey, the bicycle and education is something really close to me. It's the reason why I end up at AU 23 and 24. But it's also a key part of what I teach at NYU. So I began my journey of teaching at NYU Shanghai during the pandemic, excuse me. And I taught my classes remotely from Ireland through Zoom. And I was able to teach design and innovation to students on the other side of the planet. But I didn't realize two paths that I was traveling at the time were to converge in the near future, but not how I expected. So I was teaching fusion from Ireland to students in Shanghai, and we were working on this project and several other projects as well, which was really cool. Parallel to that career in NYU Shanghai and teaching remotely, I found myself getting back onto a bike. This time it was on 3 wheels instead of 2. And that first bike was actually pretty simple. It's pretty expensive given what it was. If anyone's here and they're interested in mountain biking, regular mountain bikes, the price of them. They're very expensive. Adaptive mountain bikes are incredibly expensive for something reasonably capable. You're talking about 8 to 10,000 US dollars, and for something good, it can cost up to $24,000 depending on specification. My friend seen me out on this bike one day and said, "You should come to the mountains," and I did, and this is where we ended up. I didn't realize I was gonna enjoy it so much, considering my accident was a mountain biking accident. But when we went down that trail, it was for the first time in 15 years, and it was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. But the adrenaline was in full flow, and the bug had well and truly bitten. I was back on a bike. The thing was, though, it wasn't long before I was outriding the bike's capability, and there was frequent failures. I was breaking stuff all the time and upgrading parts all the time, trying to extract more performance, but found very quickly that it was not going to get any further, which led to starting to work on a new bike. And it began by doing a lot of this kind of stuff, sketching, taking measurements, tweaking ideas, using a mixture of CAD and sketching to come up with form factors, trying to anticipate the limiting elements of creating a hand cycle, because they're quite a lot more complex than regular bikes. And then I started to see if I could find someone to help me to build this bike. And I was reaching out to different companies, and I think they all thought I was some crazy Irish guy talking about, building a bike for wheelchairs, right? But eventually I found a company in Spain who were interested. And we actually built the world's first carbon fiber full suspension adaptive mountain bike. Over a course of a year and with lots of back and forth conversation, this was the result. And this single build took quite an effort to execute on, as there was so many unknowns involved. They'd never built anything like this before, and when I received this bike, I immediately got out onto the trails. So it offered a lot more capability and range. It was equipped with an assistive drive, which allowed me to go a bit further over worse terrain. There were many problems with this bike as the terrain I was venturing onto began to take its toll. While carbon fiber is a super material, when it fails, it's not a great situation. And unfortunately for me, I was about to find this out. On a ride in the mountains on the trail I was used to, I hit this set of undulations that pitched the bike into the air. And on the final impact, I heard a crack. And then the bike hit the ground and slid along the trail, splintering carbon fiber as it went. The bike had had an unplanned rapid disassembly at the molecular level at one of the rear suspension structures. And that led to having this situation, this catastrophic failure. I was about 5 kilometers away from the car park with no way out. As a wheelchair user, you don't walk out from these situations. And it was a bit scary to be in such a vulnerable position again. I say vulnerable as it felt very like the time I crashed almost 16 years previously. Even though I wasn't injured, there was a feeling of helplessness at the situation. Um, but with the ingenious invention of that is the cable tie, we got the bike out. Uh, I'm not going to ask anyone how many cable ties are on this, but there was a lot. Every single one of them that we brought with us. And when I got back home with the bike, I reached out to the company who made it. And I asked them about the repairs. And they said it's going to be about 500 euros to replace the part. And their lead time was about 6 weeks. But I knew it was going to be longer than that, given having dealt with them previously. So what people don't realize is that for those with disability, it's often the case that the time is not on your side when it comes to longevity of enjoying these kinds of sports. It gets more difficult more quickly due to the toll on the body of disability. So you're less capable, your body deteriorates faster, and then someone tells you it takes longer to make that part. It means that you're in this situation where you lose so much more. The value of that time is so high, and you're losing so much more of it just because it's a specialist piece of equipment. So I was really frustrated with that idea. I felt this shouldn't be the way it is. So I decided to design the part myself. Within 2 weeks of that decision, I had a full set of parts for the bike for half the price of that single component that I was being quoted for. Um, Admittedly, they were very simple and heavy, but I knew they wouldn't break. And to me, it was a miracle that I could get the bike that back on the trail that quickly, given the timeline I had been quoted for the carbon fiber part. More importantly, what I knew now was that I could solve the problems for myself and decided that I would design an entire bike to be easier to build, faster to build, affordable to build. And I decided that when it was finished, it would be made open source. So no one who built one would find themselves in a helpless position that I had not long ago been in. So using Fusion, I designed the entire bike from beginning with new ideas and concepts. I designed the most complex version. And over the next few months, I spent hundreds of hours in Fusion working on problems, creating specific geometry based on characteristics I wanted from the bike and figuring out how it would be assembled. And this would be the beginning of the open source adaptive mountain bike. So we gave this bike a name, and it seemed to solidify the direction. There's something about a name that makes it feel a lot more real. We called it Project Mjolnir, and there were a few core tenets that we wanted to stick to in its development. It was to be customizable, affordable, repairable, and evolutionary. So individuals, when they built a bike, they could develop new parts for themselves. They could change things themselves. They could tweak and develop frame parts, and that would benefit the community. I know it seemed like a crazy idea at the time because, how do you even start something like this, right? And the answer is very simply, you get a ladder and you put some cardboard and pipes on it and you start taking measurements and developing your CAD files and then machining the parts and putting them together. And then you end up with this thing in your kitchen and almost getting kicked out because you built a bike in your kitchen. But we end up with this thing then, right? This machine that exists in the world. And what I wanted to do was make it possible to build it anywhere, right? That, once you had those files, you could get the parts you could get the parts made and sent to you anywhere in the world and build one, and it would use all bicycle components as well. And after a while it existed. I was optimistic and I was a bit scared, but it was time to find out that everything I had done in Fusion, everything I assumed based on prior experience, was it going to work? And it was time to find out. So when these assumptions become facts, right? After 7 or 8 months from the crash that broke the other bike to this thing existed, was pretty cool. And the first test of the bike went unusually and surprisingly well, considering the amount of issues I had assumed and anticipated. I think it's something that we all do as designers and researchers. We're always have this thing in the back of our mind that what if it doesn't work? What if I'm wrong about that? The only way you're going to know is to make it, put it out there and see if it does, right? And then go from there. Um, but I shouldn't have worried so much because it actually did pretty well. And again, I think that was because of the forward planning that I mentioned earlier on, having a disability, constantly trying to anticipate what might be a problem that will occur. And then we started that project. Not long after that, that bike was built. We began to do our first build as part of the vertically integrated project program based at NYU Tandon in New York City. And this program brings together staff and students to work on projects over a number of semesters on all sorts of different projects. And in July 2023, one of those bikes took to the trails of Fresh Kills Park in Staten Island, piloted by Rachel, seen in this picture. And that was the first adaptive mountain bike in New York City, which was really cool. We built the first adaptive mountain bike in Ireland. Now we built the first adaptive mountain bike in New York City. And it was incredible to believe that we only embarked on that journey a few months previously. We went on then to build the first adaptive mountain bike in the UAE, and Ahmed, who's was riding this bike there, it was the first time he'd been on an adaptive bike as well. So we had two firsts inside of the first few months. Again, we were proving that we could build these bikes in any location, just by sending the parts and files to those locations. The third one we built the first ever adaptive mountain bike in China. And this is Trista. She was the first ever person to ride an adaptive mountain bike in China. And we've been developing the project ever since there as well with a group that subsequently went into Mongolia. And we actually built the first adaptive mountain bike that went into Mongolia too, which was pretty cool, right? So we ended up with these first 4 bikes, actually 5 bikes, because we built one here and another one here in Ireland. In the first year of the project, and that led to lots of people seeing this project and reaching out to me. So we move on then to 2024, where we ended up building a bike in Boise, Idaho. And this short video is just some of the excerpts of what happened there.
Oh, it's insane. Like the fact that everything is like machined parts that was just laid out on a table yesterday morning, and I come in and I'm like, this looks like a mess. And now we have a rolling chassis like a day later.
Like I had asked, why did you use like this kind of bearing right here? And it was like, well, because everything's like adjustable for individuals.
Being that it's open source, you can get the design for the parts, take it to a machine shop, and have all the parts cut and everything done. That's a great part.
Having something like this kind of gives me like the motivation to like figure out what else is out there. And heck, after doing all this, I want to get into CAD a little bit to modify the file a little bit on this, make it a better fit for me,
Yeah, I can't wait to see how it performs. Today, got a chance to ride with Justin, and it's a really fun bike to ride behind because it's got the 2 rear wheels, and so you see the suspension in action. There's just a sense of excitement. It just feels really cool. It's completely capable. It's able to get out there into the Boise foothills, which is what we wanted to do.
The bike.
I'll stop there with that. But we then went on to build 5 bikes here in Ireland. After a chaotic summer, and we established the sport of adaptive mountain biking here in Ireland. And we brought 5 people out, 6 riders, including myself, went into the forest to learn how to ride those bikes, and then into the hills for some proper trails. And out of that group, there was only a couple of them that had prior experience in adaptive mountain biking. We only produced the first sketches in Fusion a little over a year prior to this happening, of this particular version of the bike. And to making these bikes was actually like insane to think that it could have happened that quickly. Um, and being able to discuss the designs, work remotely, globally with our students at all the major NYU campuses accelerated that. Going to the events like AU 23 and 24 actually got me a lot of contacts and reaching out to different people reaching out to me then about the project and going, oh, I know someone who'd be interested in this. In fact, the bike that we just seen in Idaho, that one came about as a result of meeting someone in Las Vegas when I was at AU 23 who said you should check out what this guy is doing, and that was a contact that was made there. And we're going back to Idaho this year to build more of those bikes. So this whole thing centers around our approach with the design, the software we're using, the opportunities that occurs as a result of going to these events, talking to each other, developing the design remotely, all this crazy stuff going on. And it's been chaotic, I won't lie, it's been absolutely insane. But it's pretty cool that we're managing to do it. And you know, this work, when we started to look at like how we establish a sport even in a single country, was with cycling in Ireland. This work sparked the idea of developing an adaptive mountain bike for a sport that doesn't even exist yet. We want to look at what an adaptive mountain bike for the Paralympics would look like. And I think that that's where we are now. We're able to start to look at, okay, what would that look like? What does this thing that doesn't exist yet for a sport that doesn't exist yet, what does that look like? And how can we start moving towards that target? But projects like this, you know, they affect not just the individuals who design and build the bikes. When someone gets to explore a forest and be in nature and an environment that they never thought they'd see, that's an incredible moment. And beyond that individual is often, you know, a parent or a family member who's seen them do extraordinary things just to live their lives and seen them struggle, but on days like this, seen them find something incredible. And I remember this is Gabby. Gabby's mother messages to say this is you know to talk about. So we hope through projects like this, we create a new status quo of never having to experience barriers in the first place. Um, but what the project is all about is education, evolution, and inclusion, right? So it's like if I can teach more students how to develop empathy tools, and if I can teach more students to understand that the future of every human can be addressed through doing this kind of work and learning in this way, we can create great experiences that benefits everyone, right? And we can allow those experiences to evolve, right? That's what this whole idea behind the bike is that it can develop and evolve in a direction that anyone wants to take it based on their own conditions. If their body is changing, they can change some parts. If they think they want to, you know, go off-road, they might want suspension. If they don't want that, they can change it to all sorts of different things. And most recently, the evolution has been moving towards a children's bike, which poses a whole bunch more problems that we think we've resolved. In fact, I spent the last couple of weeks 3D printing every single component of the kids' bike. So we can make one of those when I get back to Shanghai in February and start to test that for deployment this summer. So everything about this project is about education, evolution, and inclusion, and creating these bikes allows us to reach more people and get more people onto their trails. Personally, it's you know you know, trying to provide this feeling of flying, that feeling of the sense of speed and excitement, to be totally immersed and absolutely focused on this exhilarating experience, and to get back onto trails and to help others to get back onto trails and to go somewhere for the first time, um, to go where it was impossible to go before. So I'm just finished. Don't worry, there's some time for questions. When Rachel, Anna, and Trista got on bikes, it was a great day for them. Something that when, you know, we get on a regular bike, it's easy to take for granted. And I hope that this project can, you know, help us move another stretch towards more people with disabilities having those days more frequently and close the gap in being able to do so more frequently. And you know, same for the group that established a sport here in Ireland, and Wang Feng as well, who was one of the team that went to Mongolia. and so many other people who have been involved in this project. It's not just us building the bike. Like I said, the people who use it are the ones that are giving us the knowledge that helps us develop it in the directions it needs to go. But they also get involved by being able to be part of the design process themselves, and even get involved by playing around with CAD and going, oh, I can do this, or I can change this, or come up with a part for this this purpose. So the future is accessible, and I am going to ask a question. If we look at the three objects in this image, I know maybe no one can answer, but they're all connected together by one thing. They were all designed originally for disability. The keyboard was originally designed for a person with visual impairment. It originally was before it was even a typewriter, it was a device for being able to communicate. The electric toothbrush was designed for people with limited dexterity. And a lot of people use electric toothbrushes today. And then audiobooks, which we use quite a lot now, was originally books on tape and books on record for people with visual impairments. So when we're working on these designs, even when we're working on an empathy tool and moving towards design, we may be affecting the future in ways we don't even realize at that point. Because that's where the genesis of those ideas will come from. And we don't really realize the convenience of them and how much value is in them and how they can be good for everyone in the future sometimes. So when we're thinking about that, we should realize that there's a lot of products out there that have been designed for disability. Even today, companies are doing things differently. Nike have built the Fly Ease shoe, which was designed for people with limited dexterity or limb loss. Apple's AirPods have been developed in a direction to become hearing aids. Tommy Hilfiger had created a line of adaptive clothing, and Lancome are making makeup aids. And most recently, I seen Nike have developed a backpack that requires very little dexterity, and if you're missing limbs, you're able to use it. And all of these products are going to be things that if they're easy for someone who has those difficulties to use, it's going to be easy for everyone to use. And if they're easy for everyone to use, and you started to use it as a person today who is able-bodied, but it gets more difficult later on, you're a customer for life, right? You are able to use the same thing without you having to change. The product adapts to you. And I think that that's where we're missing a trick. We should realize that there is a bigger group of people. We should be doing more research in this. We should understand it more. We should be involved in it more and have more people with disabilities involved in these processes that allows us to do more for all of ourselves in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Noel. That was so insightful. Yay, did
I'm
you?
going to stop sharing if that's okay then, so I can see everyone. Okay.
Yeah, that was amazing presentation. And I see a lot of people's interesting comments in the chat, and just your perspective around how maybe the future products can be more adaptive. And I think that's a lot of opportunity also for us doing research in AI for design, can see. Any questions? I know we're a little bit over time. Any questions from people?
That's like asking my students just before class ends, anyone have any questions? No,
Danny,
gone.
go ahead.
But if anyone wants to follow up afterwards, completely understand, like I know people are busy and whatnot, but absolutely anyone can reach out to me.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the talk. I did want to ask if you could share any links to the open source bike design. That would be super
Sure, yeah,
interesting
yeah.
browse through.
Now,
And
forgive us, our website is not the best in the world. I'm literally going to put the link in the chat. So, but anyone that's interested in getting involved can reach out as well. I'm going to probably spend a bit of time in the US this year building more bikes. In fact, this project, I'll put this other link in the chat as well because I'm pretty proud of it.
yeah,
There's the
I would
link.
love to, I think we would love to talk more about the design process and how you ended up with that design. But I did have a question about, so you talked about, I guess we use simulation to speed up the design process a lot. And we have a lot of simulation tools, and we're not just looking at simulating materials to see if they will fail, but also the topic has come up around simulating users of product design users to see how they might interact with a tool, for example. And I know that in the design research community, there has been some research around simulating disabled users as well. And you talked a little bit about it, like the holding the pencil example. And I'm not an expert in this, but I have heard that there has been some sort of not backlash necessarily, but I think there is some limitations to simulating disabled users because, as you say, disabled users develop some sort of superpowers, or they are able to adapt to their disability, and it becomes difficult to simulate the adaptation as well. So I was wondering if you had any thoughts about this, like,
Sure.
yeah.
My thoughts on it are get more people with disabilities working with you, because that's where the two-prong approach is, like understanding that and getting into the empathic part of it, right? Like simulation is still not going to tell you the emotional impact. And it's only going to tell you what it might, this is what it's like, the amount of vibrations through the wheelchair, for example, over a particular piece of ground or whatever it might be. But it's not going to tell you that that person doesn't go out anymore because that's what's happening. It's not going to tell you that they ended up with chronic back pain because that happened, right? And I think where that's why I talk about this idea of empathy tools. Can we get into it deeper with empathy tools? Can we like get to the emotional aspect of what the condition is like as much as the physical part of it is like, right? Because they're often the tools that we don't realize exist. And that's why I was talking about the other product, or that the concept I developed around the condition of not being able to get to a bathroom or whatever it might be, right? And I feel like that that's we have to try and avoid the hero complex as well, where we're designing for disability, we're designing with disability. And that would be the way I would think about it, is like that we go away from the theatrics of it and actually engage in it. And I think the problem can often be that we're afraid of it, right? Because when we start, and I can understand what you're talking about, where there might be some backlash or whatnot, because when we start, we're not going to be able to address everyone straight away. We're not going to be able to address all disabilities straight away. We're not going to be able to address the wide gamut of disabilities straight away. But that doesn't mean we don't start and we don't do it. And that's why, like, I'm trying to teach my students, don't be afraid of this. Don't be worried about it. And I'm trying to encourage organizations to understand that, like, this is actually all of us in the future. So treat it like that, right? Don't treat it just like you're helping this person, we're helping everyone, right? And I think it's also speaks to why maybe companies like Nike and other organizations are doing this work, but they're not like screaming about it. It comes up as a nice story, but they're not doing it because they're nice people. They're doing it because they can see there's going to be 27% of the population are going to need these products in the future, right? So I think that there's a very, very high value in bringing more people with disabilities into organizations, especially when it comes to design and innovation, because that's going to help us to understand more and help us to do more. And then using that knowledge to develop empathy tools that helps us all to be more focused and centered on what it really is, not just what we think it is. We got to think as well, one of the things I came up against quite a lot was, that a lot of people with disabilities, when they are engaged by an organization, it can be difficult because it's only for a limited amount of time, but the disability doesn't stop. It needs to be a frequent, more engagement. That's what I believe myself. I think that's where we'll make the biggest impact.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks.
No worries. I know we're over time now.
Yeah, do I have time to ask?
Sure.
Okay.
I'm fine. I'll stay here all night. I think I got a bottle of whiskey here somewhere as well. If
Yeah, fascinating talk. Thanks so much. I was really interested in the process, as Danny mentioned, the design process. You were talking about sort of this combination of sketching and using Fusion. And I wonder, I wonder what the pain points were there. I imagine like you're coming up with something that's really new, like kind of a new mechanism and very new design, and you're having to do a lot yourself. And I wonder what kind of software tools could you imagine that would help you in that process? How would you
Um,
want Fusion to be different to help you in that process, for instance?
oh, well, I think that my process has changed over the last 2, 3 years through doing this, right? Where find that's what I was talking about AI at the beginning, where I feel like that um, a very interesting thing could be really useful is there like the way we've got this drop down tab in Fusion, we've got design, we've got rendering and all these different things, right? If we could do something where you do your design, but then what it does is it suggests how would I make this with plywood and 3D printed plastic before I make it from metal, which is what I've done with the bike project, right? So what happens is I start with like some PVC pipe and cardboard, right? And then I go away and I go, right, with those measurements, I can create a design. And then with that design, I'm going, right, this plate is going to be 8 millimeters thick. So my plywood needs to be 3 mil and 5 mil glued together. And then I go away and I make those on the laser cutter. And then all the other parts are 3D printed that I know are going to be machined. And all of those parts make the bike. It's not a functional bike, but it tells me where chain clearance is, where all these things are going to be that allow me to commit to cutting metal. So what I'm thinking is, like, I think that that's the bit in the middle where AI could probably help us a lot, right? Where it's like, if I want to design this thing, what are my options as far as materials for a prototype versus a finished product?
Right.
And what are my options from a manufacturing perspective for a prototype versus a finished product? And not just all 3D printed, because I can laser cut a piece of plywood quicker than I can 3D print the same part. And making those combinations come together to give us the answers. And then we can be more committed to the metal version that we know is going to be absolutely fine. So that's sort of one of the things I would be thinking about is like, is there a means for us to utilize Fusion in that way, not directly to manufacture, but somewhere in the middle where we've got this dirty sandbox of prototyping that Fusion's able to suggest to us processes for making those parts, outside of just machining and all the rest of it. Like it going to more simple tools, right? Like I said, laser cutter, 3D printers, things like that.
Oh, that's really nice. Thanks.
Yeah, no worries.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for sticking around for questions. Thank you, Noel, for
No worries.
presentation, and Yay for introducing us to Noel. I will make sure to have the recording posted ASAP so we could share it internally with folks who couldn't join us.
Yeah,
Great.
I hope it was of value to everyone. Thank you very much for having me. Yeah, thanks for getting me involved. Hopefully catch up with you all again soon.
Yeah, great to meet you, Noel.
Yeah, bye.
Bye.
All right, bye-bye. Bye.